So Chair Nash, to your final bill, I believe, House File 936. Would you like to move that before the committee?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would move that 936 come before the committee. And I have an A2 author's amendment.
And the motion for this is to move to Ways, correct?
Correct.
Okay. To your amendment.
Mr. Chair, I would move adoption of the A2. To put it in the form
Any-
put the bill in the form that I would like.
Yep. All those in favor of the A2 amendment, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Carried. To your bill as amended, Chair Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My part will be brief. I have two testifiers that can describe this in greater detail, but if you've been around the Capitol for very long, you recognize that we do a lot of rulemaking around here, and rulemaking comes with consequences. Sometimes those consequences could have been avoided had we spent a little more time on the front end looking at the cost-benefit analysis of rulemaking. We've got dozens, and my testifiers will share, but we have dozens of examples of times where rulemaking allowed for cost overruns because it wasn't fully thought through. Other states have made some significant progress in a simple step before rulemaking happens to make it more efficient. I'm not trying to get rid of rulemaking in this bill, maybe one day. But in this bill, we are trying to make it so that there is a cost-benefit analysis process that is undertaken before we go to the act of rulemaking. So with that, Mr. Chair, I will allow my testifiers to discuss the bill from there.
Please state your name for the record and proceed.
Thank you so much, chairs and members of the committee. My name is Rayanna Lee, and I'm the Legislative and Coalitions Director for the Americans for Prosperity chapter here in Minnesota. I will be brief because I want to maximize my colleagues' time here, but the way that I talk about cost-benefit analysis is when you were in school and you're taking a math test and your teacher says, I want you to show your work. And so then you have to show your formula and how you arrived at that answer. And this bill simply ensures that when agencies are adopting major regulations, they simply show their work. They show the cost, benefits, and the assumptions behind those decisions. And this matters to Minnesotans. For those of you who are aware, grassroots is our bread and butter. We knocked over 500,000 doors in the last 2 years on grassroots accountability and policy. And in 2025 alone, we spoke to more than 100,000 Minnesotans. And one of the questions was, should the state be required to show costs and benefits before adopting new regulations? The answer was north of 80%. Yes. I think that that is a common sense thing to do. And I also want to highlight that this is not a new concept. There was actually an OLA report from, I think, 1993 that highlighted the need for this, and that the rulemaking process is deficient in that aspect. So I will let my colleague here take it away, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. To the next testifier, state your name and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Graham Owens. I'm a policy fellow with the Americans for Prosperity federally, based out of Virginia. And I'm here in support of HF 936, mainly because my background, for about 15 years, I've done regulatory reform. I'm a regulatory lawyer. I've worked at regulatory agencies and roughly about 10 years as a staffer in Congress. And this bill is just about good governance, right? It's policy neutral. It doesn't say what regulations should be issued, whether they should, whether we're good or bad, but what are good government principles that should be applied through the process. And I want to point to federally, Bill Clinton, in one of his first actions, actually issued Executive Order 12866. That created the major cost-benefit analysis requirement at the federal level, created the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs, which manages it. So this is a bipartisan issue. It's about transparency, uniformity, and making sure that things that the agencies are probably already doing, and I can show they are, that they're doing it in a uniform manner, they're using the same terminology, so the people that are being regulated understand what's happening, how they're balancing benefits and costs, so that they can understand, okay, I'm going to justify this cost of my business, changing my shop floor, changing my farm, whatever it may be, because I can clearly see the benefits of this regulation far outweigh the costs that I'm incurring. And with that, I kind of want to actually point to the opposition letter sent in by the Center for Energy and Environment. I don't know if they have a representative here, but I would love to work with them because I actually read this as a letter of support, because they talk about the immediate costs, but the building code safety, structural integrity, reducing fire risk, those are the benefit side of the ledger. That's why this is so important, so that we can put together a standard that identifies and clearly states all of these benefits and shows what the costs are. and makes that analysis prior to issuing the regulation. It's going to make it a lot easier to stomach and a lot easier for the public to understand. I also understand there's a lot of flexibility here. My understanding in reading this bill as the standards are not yet set, whether it's the Office of Administrative Hearings or the court, whichever body is ultimately deemed required to create these standards, I encourage you to encourage agencies, you yourselves, to work with that body to develop these in a way that works for Minnesota, that works for the agencies. So there's a lot of flexibility in how these can be done, how stringent they need to be. I point to the Virginia model by keeping it as slimmed down, as clear as possible, because you want the public to understand what they're reading. It does them no good if it's this wonky, very difficult legalese document that provides all sorts of benefits that they don't understand, or the benefits or the costs are too strenuous. So simpler the better, but there's a lot of flexibility here to make this work for your state. And there's also a lot of ways that we can do this that are essentially cost negative, cost neutral. Again, I point to what we call the Virginia model, where they created the Office of Regulatory Management there. That office was able to save roughly $1.25 billion in 2 years at zero cost to the state of Virginia. What they did is use emerging technology and 4 staffers that they already had in the governor's office to identify duplicative regulations, streamline permitting requirements, make sure that 2 agencies aren't trying to tackle the same problem, that they are able to remove outdated regulations. All of this with 4 people using emerging technologies and a can-do attitude, essentially saving, and that was just the first 2, but that's a 2025 number. So that wasn't even towards the end of the Governor Youngkin's term. So there are ways to do this. I also, as has been said, over time, this will actually save the state of Minnesota money, because the agencies are going to be identifying problems and doing this cross-agency review prior to promulgating the regulations. They're not going to try to backtrack. There's going to be a lot of paperwork requirements saved, a lot of scrambling time saved, because you have a uniform process by which every agency can do what they're already probably doing in some form, and they're going to have a step-by-step guide, the things that they need to hit, and it's going to save you a lot of money in litigation. Because at the end of the day, courts look at whether regulations are arbitrary and capricious. And the courts are going to look at this and say, okay, well, they did a very clear study on do the benefits outweigh the costs here. And in imposing this regulation on the public, we can very clearly see this was a well-thought-out process. This was not arbitrary and capricious. This regulation should be upheld. And those are the type of analyses that courts often look at. And when those aren't there, you're much more likely to see these overturned, particularly if in the future, like federally, there's no more deference required. But even without deference, the policy, when federal government agency regulations were ultimately overturned, they're almost always because they skipped a step or they just threw the regulations out willy-nilly. So even if they got deference on their policy decisions, they weren't getting deference on the procedural decisions, and that's where they get tripped up. So by setting forth very clear procedural proceedings through this process and working with the Office of Administrative Hearings, you can make your agencies very well prepared to withstand any court challenges. So you're going to be able to protect against bad regulations and support and protect good regulations. And then finally, as I mentioned, I want to point that agencies are already doing this. I'm not a Minnesota expert. My little brother lives here, so I've been lucky to be a part of this community in some form. He's been here about 10 years. But in a short research last night, I found just in the 50th volume of your state register, 4 regulations that would have pretty much complied with this. Maybe the terminology is a little different because, as I said, it lacks that uniformity. But 4, and that's just last July to today. So I think the agencies are better prepared to handle this than people may want to say. And just like our friends at CE said, those benefits are going to be included. And they say here, Minnesota already has rigorous, transparent rulemaking process. Why not make it uniform? Why not create the same terminology so that the things they're doing are being done the same way, consistently across the entire government? So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you.
Chair Nash?
And Mr. Chair, if we could, in your packet, members, you'll see that this is in your packet. This is not a red state, blue state divide. If you'll look, there's Colorado, California, Michigan, Oregon, and Illinois, not exactly known for their vast conservatism, that they are already doing this. I think that that's a very good indication that this is just sound policy that says if we're going to promulgate rules, we should actually take a little bit of time, tap the brakes. And when the comment was made to have the math teacher show your work, I shuddered a little bit because it brought back memories of my I think 4th grade teacher, Miss Phoenix, saying, "Show your work, Jimmy." Even though I knew what the answer was, I still had to show the work. And no, Representative Lugar-Nicolai, you may not call me Jimmy. I saw the registry like, no. But members, this is being done in blue states right now. So this is not something that is a vast right-wing conspiracy. This is something that's just good governance. It is something that we can tell the people of the state of Minnesota that we have gone the extra step to make sure that we're taking a moment to make sure that when we promulgate rules, that we are doing it effectively, efficiently, and looking at what is the potential cost benefit before we even publish the rules. So thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we have one more person that's signed up to testify. Is a Kylene Lindgren here? Very good. Please make your way and state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Colleen Lindgren. I'm the Senior State Policy Manager for the Pacific Legal Foundation, and we're a nonprofit public interest law firm that represents clients free of charge in constitutional cases where their rights have been violated. And one of the areas that we have had a lot of experience in is dealing with regulatory overreach and other issues that honestly would really have been helped. Our clients would have really been helped in a lot of states if they had had something like this implemented before regulations went into place. And in my job, I get the privilege of working with legislators who proactively want to change their laws. So as a native Minnesotan, I'm really excited to see a reform like this coming through. And Mr. Owens hit a lot of the high points. So in the interest of time, I am going to pare down my comments slightly, but I will say Virginia does serve as a really good model for this, for creating greater transparency and accountability in rulemaking, and ensuring that critical cost-benefit analysis and impact on rules that it has on regulated parties, local governments, and other stakeholders, which we all know is important. And again, you're getting a lot of this stuff out of the way up front by implementing this type of cost-benefit analysis. And as the sponsor and Mr. Chair mentioned, there are at least 10 states that already do this. And then there are more states, including Wisconsin and Iowa, that also have this in some form in other areas of their regulatory review process, whether it's sunset or other things. And so this is not a new concept. It's coast to coast. There are many states looking at this, and there are also several states looking at including this in other types of regulatory reform bills this year, or bolstering their cost-benefit analysis as well. And so I'd like to highlight two, in addition to the cost saving, the ability to save a lot on costs, like Virginia has proven is possible. Another thing that I think is really important about this bill is implementing the online engagement and information for the public. That's something that Virginia did as well, and increasing transparency in the rulemaking process is so important. In this bill, it requires that agencies both prepare preliminary and final cost-benefit analyses, which must be published and made accessible, and that these analyses have to include projected costs and benefits for all relevant parties, including stakeholders, local governments, state agencies, and they must be conducted using standardized models. And another really great feature, important feature of this bill, is that it requires agencies to notify relevant legislative committees of certain rule adoptions and amendments. So you're enhancing transparency and legislative oversight and ensuring greater engagement with citizens and making sure that you as elected officials, you're the direct representatives of the people, are engaged in these important and sometimes costly rulemaking processes that have the effect of law on your constituents. And you have agency experts that you're working with, but they are not elected and you are. And so this, I think, is a great way, great practical way to make sure that you all are working together, able to represent your constituents really well. And I'd like to draw your attention to a letter that was submitted in the packet in closing from Patrick McLaughlin at the Hoover Institute. Patrick and I have had the chance to work together many times over the years. And he wrote that a recurring lesson in his research is that regulatory analysis works best when it's early, comparative, transparent, and consequential. And Mr. McLaughlin is a national expert. He has developed a methodology for actually doing meaningful research and quantitative analysis on how regulations, different types of regulations and reforms impact states. He's worked in the U.S. and Canada, and so I would encourage you to take a look at his letter as well. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Lindgren. With that, we will go to member discussion. Representative Lugar-Nicolai.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a lot of concerns, So I'm just going to start at the top. First of all, I am pretty confident that the reason that some of our regulations already reflect cost-benefit analysis is because it was originally in the statute, in Chapter 14. And this is language that is struck through on page 4, and at lines 4.1 through 4.16. So the SONARs, the statements of need and reasonableness, which we all call SONARs, are supposed to include this analysis already. Additionally, the work that OAH and the work that administrations do is already constrained by the delegation of authority that we give them. So the legislature is really the first point of contact in terms of ensuring that there is a cost-benefit analysis, a reasonable one for any regulation, which may only be promulgated to implement the statutes that we have already adopted. That is the only purpose of a regulation in state law. And so the first line of defense is really us. We should be doing that. And if that's not happening, then I think that raises a different problem about our deliberation process. Additionally, I am also concerned by language at lines 3.8 through 3.9. The agency must report all significant uncertainties. The agency must not express unquantifiable qualitative factors of life in dollar terms. I think herein lies the concern I have about how this would play out in practice, which is that stakeholders on either side of the metric would be asked or counted upon to provide metrics that may be difficult in practice. One issue that is qualitative, but around which we absolutely need to make policy, and there may need to be regulations, is accessibility. Accessibility for a person with a disability provides changes in qualitative factors of life that aren't necessarily expressed in dollars. But of course, it's part of our policy-making metric, and if we delegated it to an agency, it would have to be part of theirs as well. And so I do think we need to proceed with caution, not only because I think this is already happening, so this would be non-unique in debate parlance, but also I'm concerned that we are actually moving us backwards in terms of thinking about ways in which our laws can be implemented that make Minnesotans' lives better, but may not have a dollar amount attached to them.
Chair Nash.
But I didn't hear a question, but I heard concerns, and we can talk about that as this proceeds through the process. And I'm happy to work with you, Representative Lugar-Nicolai.
Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Chair Nash. So a question that I have on 115, 116. So this says that what is being proposed here is that if this cost-benefit analysis is done, and I have issues about like how it's done, but if it's done and it doesn't come out where the benefits exceed the cost, then full stop. The rulemaking has to stop, and whatever policy is being done doesn't get put in place. Is that correct?
Chair Nash.
Yes.
Representative Kraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Chair Nash. So the problem I have is we in the legislature will often ask an agency to do rulemaking as part of laws that we create, maybe for some portion of it that requires it. And so it feels to me then that what we're doing here is we're ceding our legislative authority to this this process of cost-benefit analysis that we should be doing up front. So I sympathize a lot with what Representative Lugar-Nicolai said, but I have real concerns with saying we're going to give up our legislative authority to unelected officials that are making a cost-benefit analysis that can negate what we've determined to do
And Mr.
in
Chair.
the legislature. So,
Chair Nash.
Mr. Chair, I would argue, Representative Kraft, that many of the rules that get made right now are already doing what you've just described, that they are not reflecting what we've asked, and they are doing it as an unelected bureaucrat. So it's in part your counter there is already being done. So
Representative Kraft.
thank you, Mr. Chair.
Follow up.
Yes, well, Chair Nash, that seems like a different issue if you're saying they're not doing effective rulemaking. But what we're doing here is we are saying, that they can negate what we're saying. We're giving the carte blanche that says if it comes out cost-benefit negative for an analysis that may be flawed, that we've just given that up. So I'm a no.
Chair Nash or Mr. Owens.
If I may, I respond both to Representative Lugar Nicolai and Mr. Kraft there. On 2 points, one, so from my cursory review of the volumes that I looked through of the state register, the regulations I did find that had these cost benefit analysis were those that had the sonar, but not everyone had it, or whatever, I believe that's what it's called. They're the ones that have it, but not every regulation, I believe, is required to carry that. And that's kind of the point here of having, right, a uniform requirement across all regulatory actions to ensure that the cost benefit analysis is done consistently every single time. And I would say this wouldn't be conceding your legislative authority. In fact, this is your opportunity to exercise that, right? To ensure that we are putting those checks, that this body's putting those checks on the regulatory agencies to ensure that they have some requirements and some checks on what they have to do prior to imposing law on the citizens of Minnesota, right? So it's an opportunity to say, what should they have to consider, and putting that into law so that you're providing that oversight. And if we would certainly support any additional checks to ensure that those cost benefit analyses are reviewed by the legislature, that they're accurate. But
Chair Nash? No.
Back to you.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just more of a comment here. Thank you for bringing this bill forward, Chair Nash. To me, it seems like benefits like clean air or clean water are often diffuse, but on lines 1.22 and 1.23 of the bill, it just assumes benefits should be only expressed in terms of dollars, and Representative Lugar Nicolai kind of spoke to this issue. On the other hand, costs are to regulated parties, so there's something of an imbalance in the bill in my mind. And the bill doesn't allow any exemptions to the full cost-benefit analysis for something like a housekeeping rule. And this, in my mind, creates a lot of extra work for very little benefit. Housekeeping rules often help regulated parties by modernizing reporting or other requirements. And just kind of generally speaking, I find it interesting when the only testifiers in support of a bill are from conservative think tanks, including one who apparently flew in from out of state, and we don't hear from people from the general public. So, I think this bill creates a lot of extra work. I'm not sure that there's a benefit. I ironically would probably like to see a cost-benefit analysis for the work imposed by this bill, and I am not planning on supporting it.
Chair Nash? response?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, again, Representative Freiberg, Colorado, California, Michigan, Oregon, Illinois, all blue states, very blue states. California, probably the bluest of all of them, are already doing this. So apparently, some of your concerns may not be shared by them. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Joy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 82% of Minnesota support transparency and making state government show cost benefits before passing new regulations. We're debating a bill that I think is just checks and balances, and I appreciate that, Chair Nash, for this. This, does a lot for people. Minnesota overwhelmingly support transparency and accountability at a time of high cost of living. We can't afford bad regulations. This is a common sense bill voters would agree on. And I think this is something we have to do. We're not we might have brought conservative people to testify on this, but you just gave examples of states that are doing this, that are both sides. It's always a scare tactic why we don't want to change government, because we don't want checks and balances. We don't want transparency. So I appreciate you bringing this forward. We've lost $9 billion. This is a step forward to be able to make sure we have checks and balances in Minnesota. I appreciate it, and I ask for a roll call.
Roll call being requested. We will have a roll call. Vice Chair Bonner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and our Vice Chair and Chair Nash. I'm going to be candid with you. I'm struggling with this one, and I'm going to just briefly say why. On the one hand, I think there's real benefit in having transparency, and I really like that about this particular bill. And one of the things that we see in a lot of other states that we don't see in Minnesota is often there's usually, I've seen a lot of states where they have sort of this introductory paragraph that talks about the legislative intent, and it often speaks to the very things we're talking about, sort of what are the benefits or the costs of, the specific proposal. So it actually kind of gets into that, and that's something that Minnesota doesn't really do, at least not in statute. So I think that's one that I like, and I appreciate the idea of uniformity as well, and making sure that we're consistent across the board. Here's where I'm struggling, is I do think that in many respects, we do this, actually. In our discourse, in our discussion, we often do this. I know many of our agencies do this. I know Minute, I think, does a really great job a lot of times of doing some of this and sort of weighing out, what are the benefits and is this something we can bring forward, especially when dollars are tight. They have to make that justification, because if they can't, it's not going to go anywhere, right? So I think that's a problem. And so I do worry a little bit about that. And I also am struggling a little bit with this concept of assigning a dollar value to a benefit. And I think that's the part that I'm most struggling with, because there are some things where I don't know how you put a dollar benefit to accessibility for people with disabilities. I don't know how you assign a dollar value to clean water or clean air. If you're in Greater Minnesota, for example, and you're worried about whether something's going to pollute your groundwater tables, a lot of those folks use wells. If you're using a well, what is the value of being able to have clean water to drink? I don't know that you can quantify that in dollars and cents, but I think anybody in Greater Minnesota would agree that I want clean well water because that's what my family's going to drink. That's what they're going to bathe in. So I think, I suspect our side of the aisle is struggling a little bit with some of that, how we quantify what that benefit is, and I think that's where we're struggling. So I'm just going to say I like the concept of this bill. I like the uniformity. I like the transparency of it. I think that's great. But I do still have some reservations about some of how we calculate benefit based on a dollar amount that I'm not entirely sure we've overcome. So, but I do want to thank Chair Nash for this, because I actually do think that transparency is a good idea.
Chair Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Bonner, sign on. We can move this to Ways and Means. We can work together to improve the bill to where you'll be more enthusiastic. But my testifier did have an answer to the quantitative values of things that have been mentioned.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my testimony, the standards, the exact standards to be used have not been set. Those would be established by either the Office of Administrative Hearings or the Court of Administrative Hearings if another amendment is adopted. Minnesota is a very generous healthcare program. How much is spent, each year, for example, protecting people who are injured on the job or helping people make sure how much is spent cleaning up the lakes? These are things that if there's a regulation that would be able to prevent that from happening, that you can solve the problem up front, all of that money you save from no longer having to pay out these workers to protecting people on the job, to protecting public safety. If you aren't protecting disabilities, you're in violation of the American Disability Act. There are going to be fines for that. So there are a lot of costs that the state is already paying to solve these problems. And if an agency has a solution that can address those health, safety, risk problems up front by preventing them, which is what regulations often are meant to do, to prevent injuries on the job, to prevent consumers from buying products that harm them at home. So the amount of money that is being spent when we don't have those, to provide healthcare, to provide safety, to clean up our waters, to prevent that pollution. There are ways to calculate that, because the state, I'm sure is spending a ton of money having to clean up because maybe there are not certain regulations and things in place that prevent that pollution up front. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but I do believe that there are opportunities when establishing those standards to kind of work through those, and maybe not everything, and perhaps there's an opportunity for amendment. I would leave that to Chair Nash. But I would also encourage this body to look at, this can start as a pilot program. You can look at it for, 5, 10 years or so, see if it's working, see if those benefits are being cut out. And if they are, then, this body could vote to not approve it again. But taking the opportunity to provide that transparency, I believe the cost would ultimately be substantial, and also, those benefits that people will continue to be protected, because again, this is about no regulation. It's about smart regulation.
A warm welcome back to Representative Jones. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Chair Davis. Thank you, Chair Nash, for bringing this forward. I have a question about how this impacts innovation. So and especially scaling of technology. So just, I was thinking about various scenarios, and I know we don't regulate vehicles at the state level the way that the feds do, but I was just thinking about like catalytic converters, right? At one point, we decided that we needed to put catalytic converters into vehicles in order to improve the air quality. Sure, at the very beginning, that cost a lot of money. Over time, we, and there was innovation in order to develop that, and over time, those costs came down. So how would you incorporate a scenario like that with this bill?
Chair Nash. Mr. Owens.
Would you mind repeating? Sorry, I'm not sure I quite understood.
Representative Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair. And so the piece that I'm getting at is, when we're establishing some type of regulation, a lot of times, so that's new, right? And so we're having to spend a lot of time and effort and resources, and companies or staff are trying to figure out like what is the solution to address a problem. Over time, once we've figured out that solution, being able to implement that solution gets easier, and so it becomes more cost effective. It becomes cheaper. So how do you address that type of scenario with this legislation?
Mr. Owens.
Well, I would point this, it's not directly here. I would love to see it in here. We call it sunsetting, retrospective review, periodic review. I think it's an incredibly important piece. There are some programs federally in other states. In fact, Colorado's had some sort of review since like the 70s, and there's roughly about 30-some states. But basically, you require agencies every 5, 10, however many years to look back on the regulations that promulgated to say, what are the costs now? Were our estimates correct? Are we actually solving the problem we set out to solve? Is the problem solved? Has emerging technology taken the problem we set out to solve away, or made it more efficiently, made it so that we're able to address it more efficiently so that we no longer need the specific rules that we set out? I think that's a great plan. I would think that would be a great amendment here to make sure that the costs that we anticipated, they very likely could have changed. And that cost benefit analysis could be quite different 5, 10 years from now. And so it's important to look back.
Representative Jones,
Yeah,
follow up.
if I may, Co-Chair Davis, thank you. So I guess my concern is if that solution is not allowed to move forward in the first place because it is not seen as the benefits don't outweigh the cost at the beginning. So if we can't implement that, we will never see the scaling, and so then we will never see the efficiencies down the road.
Chair Nash, Mr. Owens.
My apologies.
Mr. Owens.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I don't have a specific example on that, but just because the regulatory program wasn't started doesn't mean that those technologies are not going to continue to grow, that we're not going to become more efficient. I would encourage agencies to say, wow, that's a good idea. The cost-benefit analysis said that today this isn't ready, but 5 years, let's look back at this and see if technology or whatever has become more efficient makes this program work. So that doesn't, for all of us who ever spent a day, working in a legislature, small victories matter because you hope that we're going to take that back up when the time is right, so that the effort done by the regulatory agency to look into that program is brought back up when that time is right, so that all the research, it's not that it's not going to happen that day, but they can go back and do another cost benefit analysis, say, okay, now we're ready to implement this type of program, or to, perhaps switch that program, draft the regulation in a way that says, well, we're going to look at it again in 5 years, and perhaps we can change it a little bit then if it's more efficient to do so.
Quick follow-up, Representative Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair Davis, or Vice Chair Davis, and Mr. Owen. I don't think, I guess I'm just not totally sold on that. I think we've seen a multitude of regulations that have pushed industry much faster than they otherwise would have. I can think of in energy, that's certainly the case with heat pumps, whereas we don't necessarily have really hardcore regulations around air source heat pumps. There are in other states, and that has what has caused the industry to grow. And so I'm very concerned that things like this could actually hamper our ability to realize those full benefits. I mean, they may be more costly at the beginning, but that more efficiency down the road. So I'll be a no on this. Thank you.
Chair Cleavorn.
Thank you. And again, I just love the State Gov Committee. People ask why I like this committee, but we always have a great, robust conversation. Representative Joy, I just want to remind everybody that the statement was made that this is a transparency bill. I think everybody in this room agrees that transparency and sunlight is a really awesome thing. And so I appreciate your commitment to that, and Chair Nash, your commitment to transparency as well. The problem that I have with this legislation is the same problem I had with the bill that I was asked to carry. It appears to me that this is model legislation from a think tank that wants a bill to move forward without really doing the analysis of what we already have in Minnesota. The states that you mentioned previously, I don't know if they use sonar. I don't know what they do, and I don't really care because I know what we do in Minnesota. And to our conversation, Chair Nash, that you know that I already had a concern with the bill before the testimony because not everything that government does has that initial positive cost-benefit relationship. We often have to do things that cost more money than we would want, right? I can't say that we would want, that the cost-benefit analysis would say is bad. And disability services is something I wholly support, would maybe be one of those things, accessibility, right? It costs a lot of money to put in a doorway in a city hall in greater Minnesota that, for example, one person would use, but it's the right thing to do, right? And regulation is the same in my mind. So this is not a bill that I am willing to support today. I appreciate the fact that it was brought forward, but it's not a bill that I would want to move out of committee, and I would ask our members to vote against this bill since a roll call has been requested. I do believe it is a bill looking for a solution that we already have, and it is duplicative, and therefore not hitting the cost-benefit ratio. Our regulations already have to go through sonar. It's not just some of them. And so, members, I ask for a no vote on our side of the aisle.
And Chair Nash, before we go to your closing comments, I would just like to thank you for this bill and Mr. Owens for your testimony, not just your testimony, but your conservative think tank. Because at a time where we just wasted an $18 billion surplus, raised taxes by $10 billion, $10 billion, and then we've seen billions of dollars worth of fraud going through this state. And your survey shows what Minnesota wants. You guys door knocked a ton of doors. Minnesotans want fiscal responsibility right now. And so I would think at this time, fiscal responsibility, conservative policies is exactly what Minnesota needs. So I thank you for coming and testifying with us today. And to that, Chair Nash, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, members, I spent a lot of time with my wife, the industrial engineer, who talked about process drives improvement. And I believe that this would be under that idiom of process drives improvement, that the more we can layer on top of this, uniformity is a great first step for that process improvement. So with that, I would renew my motion that House File 936 as amended be referred to Ways and Means.
With that, Chair Nash renews his motion that House File 936 as amended be moved to Ways and Means. So the CA will take the roll.
Chair Nash.
Aye.
Representative Cleavorn.
No.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Bonner.
Abstain.
Representative Anderson.
Anderson, aye.
Representative Clardy.
No.
Representative Freiberg. No. Representative Jones.
No.
Representative Joy. Yes. Representative Kosnick.
Aye.
Representative Kraft.
No.
Representative Lugar Nicolai.
No.
Representative Quam.
Yes.
Representative Sexton.
Yes.
There being 7 ayes, 6 nays, 1 abstain, the bill does not pass.